In a world of international flights, international hotels, international space stations, international markets, and international spies, comes the International Standard Version Bible. Join Stephen as he looks at this International Bible.
Hello, yes, that's right. Today we're having a look at the International Standard Version, or the ISV, an English translation for the Bible that was completed and published electronically in 2011. And I believe that is, with a bit of searching, you can actually buy a hard copy or a paperback copy of that particular Bible even today. Interesting thing about the ISV, International Standard Version, is that it used the text from the Dead Sea Scrolls in order to provide a textual apparatus, as they say, to understand the Old Testament. The translation aimed to be central between the literal translation and an idiomatic translation. A philosophy, they say, the translation team called it a literal-idiomatic translation. And you might say, well, what is an idiomatic? What is idiomatic? Idiomatic means that it's a language that is peculiar or to a particular language or a particular dialect. For example, in some parts of the world, the English, they might say, you have to bite the bullet. And that's an idiomatic expression. That means to accept something unpleasant without complaining. And so it's basically more using a local colloquialisms, more towards the paraphrase. Let's just have a look at the spectrum, the translation spectrum that we've used in the past, and just have a look at that and see where the International Standard Version lies. Okay, if you haven't seen this English Bible translation comparison chart before, it is one of many that are out there on the internet. Over here on the right-hand side, we see the paraphrase, which is basically the Hebrew and the English has been translated or written out in a vernacular that is common to the way in which we speak in ordinary everyday life. Here in the center, we have a thought for thought. In other words, they've taken the Greek and the Hebrew and they've thought, okay, what is the author trying to portray? What are they trying to get across to the reader? And we have Bibles such as the New International, for example, the New American Bible, and other Bibles like that, the New Revised Standard Version over here. And then on the left-hand side, we have the word for word. And we've done quite a few word for words in the past. We have the New American Standard Bible, Modern English Version, the Amplified, King James, and there's quite a few over here on this left-hand side. So where does the International Standard Version lie? According to this particular chart, it lies right here, almost in the center with the New International Version. So the International Standard Version, they've put it as a thought for thought. In other words, it is sort of like it's a word for word, but also a paraphrase, which is probably a bit like idiomatic for understanding. Well, let's just then have a look at a comparison between a couple of verses, and we'll have a look at the International Standard Version compared to the English Standard Version, which is more word for word. It is not as literal as, say, the New American Standard Bible or the Young's Literal, etc. And then we'll compare it to the New International Version, which is almost in the same place on the chart itself. So let's just have a look at Genesis 1, 1-5. Here we are in Genesis 1, 1-5. The International Standard Version says, "In the beginning, God created the universe, and when the earth was as yet unformed and desolate, with the surface of the ocean depths shrouded in darkness, and while the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, God said, 'Let there be light.' So there was light. And God saw that the light was beautiful. He separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day, the darkness night. The twilight and the dawn were day one." Let's have a look at the English Standard Version. "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void." Very familiar to if you've been used to reading the New American or the King James or New King James. "Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." So the New International Version, which is in that word for word or thought for thought area like the International Standard Version. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light was good. He separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And so there is quite a bit of difference between the International Standard Version and even those two versions. For example, the International Standard Version brings in the word universe rather than the heavens and the earth. It talks about the earth being unformed and desolate, and when the surface of the ocean's depths shrouded in darkness, etc. And then it talks about twilight and the dawn as being day one. So it is certainly very much an idiomatic or a paraphrase, leaning towards possibly more of a thought-for-thought translation. Let's have a look at one then in the New Testament, a well-known passage, Romans 12, chapter 12, verses 1 to 2. In the International Standard Version, it says, I therefore urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercies, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices that are holy and pleasing to God, for this is the reasonable way for you to worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but continuously be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may be able to determine what is God's will, what is proper, pleasing, and perfect. English Standard Version, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then the well-known International Version, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. Notice the New International brings in brothers and sisters, whereas the previous two just had brothers or brethren. In view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So it brings out, the ISV brings out what is proper and pleasing and perfect. Now, as I said, it still has the brothers rather than brothers and sisters, transformed by the renewing of your mind to be able to determine what God's will is. So as you can see, the International Standard Version reads in some ways very different to some of the versions we're used to, in other ways similar. And it sort of expands on the meanings of some of the words that we're quite used to. On their website, they have provided for us a downloadable document, a PDF, that we can read together about what the ISV is all about. Let's just have a quick look at that and run through some of the details on it. Here we are looking at that first page of, it says here, introducing the most readable and accurate English translation of the Bible ever produced. That's a pretty bold statement. It is the most readable and accurate English translation of the Bible ever produced. For those of you out there who are familiar with the ISV, what do you think of the ISV? Do you think it is the most readable and accurate translation? Those of you who want to go online and check it out for yourselves, let me know what you think in the margins below, the comments below. So it says here on the left that the ISV is the first totally new translation from the original languages in decades. ISV is not a revision of the outdated translation, nor is a paraphrase. Okay. ISV is the only translation in any language that includes the book of Isaiah from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there are over 5 million electronic copies of the International Standard Version translation has been distributed worldwide, which has created a market for the print edition. So that's a lot of downloads, 5 million electronic copies. So it talks about the origins of the ISV. We'll just run through a couple of the paragraphs here. Before the ISV Bible translation project was undertaken, it's essential that the need for such a translation project be investigated. Although several widely used translations already existed in English, none of these seem fully satisfactory. It says here that excessively literal versus excessively idiomatic. In some cases, the translations examined were deemed to be excessively literal. Many of the phrases were found to be unnatural and heavy. Language used was in many cases archaic. In other cases, the general language and style of the translation was found to be fully adequate, but the level of paraphrasing was so high that people had difficulty using the translation in preaching, teaching, and personal study. Occasionally, the paraphrase of some of the sample text examined in our initial review was actually the opposite of what the original language said. In most cases, the need was for a translation that was both accurate and readable, dignified and literary. In other words, it was the coherence of the text as a whole and the accuracy of information provided to the reader that was needed to be corrected. This could never be done on a piecemeal or haphazard basis. And so, in view of this situation, new translation of the Bible in contemporary English was deemed to be justified, called the International Standard Version. Translation intended that the ISV be employed for liturgical and pulpit uses, as well as devotional reading, Bible study, and reading in the home. It was intended to be moderately literal translation, and the Committee on Translation sought to avoid paraphrasing tendencies of some modern versions. So in other words, it says it required a new translation paradigm. Neither literal nor the idiomatic paradigm was considered sufficient. And so the Committee on the Translation opted for a third alternative. They called it the literal-idiomatic paradigm. Its goal, accuracy and excellence in communication. And it says here the target reading level in English was 8th to the 9th grade. And they put out here it's supposed to be fair, accurate, and non-interpretive. In other words, not putting their bias, for denominational bias, into it. And has here considered these important distinctives. ISV is original. There's no mere revision of a once useful but now outdated translation, no mere paraphrase either. And in other words, it is original in what they've done, they say. They say that the ISV is accurate. I haven't had the time to actually go through and to make sure it is accurate, but they affirm that it is accurate. And for those of you who do have the time or are used to the ISV, you can let me know whether you believe it is accurate. Most insightful version of the Bible you will ever read. It is distinctive. Subtle nuances of the original language stand out with a crystal clarity that will astonish you. For example, poetic passages such as Philippians 2, 6-11 and Titus 3, 4-7 have been crafted as true poems. The ISV is readable. Passages flow smoothly in clear, natural English, which is what we found when we read those couple of passages. ISV is contemporary, conveying thoughts, intents, and words of the original text in a language people can understand, appreciate, and apply to their lives today. ISV is trustworthy. World-class translators and consulting scholars clearly identified by name and by their credentials. In other words, it wasn't just one man, one woman doing the translation, but it was a group of consulting translators and scholars. ISV is insightful. Thousands of detailed footnotes provide comprehensive insights and meaning and background to the biblical text. ISV is intergenerational. First Bible translation specifically crafted for our computer literate generation, for the younger people. And for the ISV is truly international, hence the name, International Standard Version. You won't find slang, national colloquialisms, or confusing regionalisms. Some distinctive features of the ISV. ISV is a new translation, not a revision, which is what we had a look at here before. For example, here the ISV was produced by Bible scholars who believe that all scripture is inspired by God, useful for teaching, reproof, for correction, and training in righteousness. Used the most ancient manuscripts available and the most recent archaeological discoveries. ISV is a computer-friendly translation. First English Bible conceived, designed, translated, formatted primarily for a computer-literate generation, which can be read in Kindle, in Mobi file format from the Barnes & Noble book, e-publications, Apple iPhones, iPad, Android operating systems. The ISV is sensitive to poetic forms in the original text. In other words, it treats subtle nuances of original text with special care. For example, several passages of the Bible appear to have been rendered in poetic form and first penned by the authors. The ISV has meticulously crafted these original passages as true poems. The ISV is sensitive to literary forms in the original text. In other words, they were didn't try to change some of the original text into a more modern way of reading it or writing it, they say. It's sensitive to conservative modern textual scholarship. In other words, they tended to be more conservative rather than be radical and be more out there in how they translated. The ISV is a literal idiomatic translation, which we've had a look at before. They say that all major translations fall somewhere on the scale between complete formal equivalence and complete functional equivalence. And they talk about the King James, Good News Bibles, NIVs, etc. There's Chuck Misler. You may have heard of him. I have not been a fan of the modern translations, but the International Standard Version is a refreshing exception. Terrific, he says. Truly the most readable, accurate English translation of the Bible ever produced. That's a very glowing endorsement. And turns, you read this yourself later. Sample passages from the ISV. It says here, compare two versions of the trustworthy statements of the pastoral epistles in 1 Timothy 3:1. The one who would be an elder, the one who would an elder be, a noble task desires he. This verse is less poetically and less memorable rendered if a man desires the office of overseer, desires a good work. For magical lines, we might think of Jesus' words from Matthew 8, verse 20, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest. They made it very poetical. To this world, Messiah came, sinful people to reclaim. Matthew 11, wedding song we played for you, the dance you simply scorned. A woeful dirge we chanted too, but then you would not mourn. Interesting, isn't it? It's how it probably would have been written back in those days, of more of a stanza, more of a poetic way of looking at it. And you can go on here and have a look at it. In God's own form existed he, and shared with God's equality, deemed nothing needed grasping. Instead poured out in emptiness, a servant's form did he possess, a mortal man becoming. In human form he chose to be, and lived in all humility, death on a cross obeying. Now lifted up by God to heaven, a name above all others given, this matchless name possessing. And so when Jesus' name is called, the knees of everyone shall fall, wherever they're residing. Then every tongue with one accord will say that Jesus the Messiah is Lord, while God the Father praising. And it goes on here with further examples, which we don't have time to look at. And then look at the love song in 1 Corinthians 13, love is always patient, love is always kind, love is never envious or arrogant with pride, nor is she conceited, and she is never rude. She never thinks just of herself or ever gets annoyed. She never is resentful, is never glad with sin, always glad to side with truth and please that truth will win. She bears up under anything and believes the best in all. There is no limit to her hope, and never will she fall. And it goes on with explanation of the Dead Sea Scrolls and International Standard Version. But I think we'll leave it at that. It's an interesting document to read. If you get your hands on this PDF copy, you can have a more detailed look at it. And so, as I said before, it's electronic versions you can have a look at. But also, if you go to one site like Amazon, the international one in America, Amazon.com, you can see here that we have the Holy Bible here at the top, International Standard Version for $9.99, a Kindle edition, which you can download instantly. And then we have the New International Standard Version, the New Testament, and it's $16.68, and it's a paperback. And again, the Holy Bible in a different cover for $24 on paperback. And you'd have to probably shop around and look around at your own bookstore online to see whether you can find a complete Bible in a hard copy with a paperback or hard copy version if you want to buy one, or you can, as I said, you can read online. One thing that they have done that made these International Standard Version available on Bible Gateway, which you can look up online. Maybe you've got it on your phone, or you can also look on Bible Hub, and you can read it there and you can compare it to other translations. So that is the International Standard Version. What do you think of it? Do you like it? It reads quite nicely. Has different words in places to what we're used to. If you're used to the formal ones like the NIV or the King James, New King James, etc. But in your comments, let us know what you think. So I hope you enjoyed this short video on the International Standard Version. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share so more people might see it Until next time, God bless.